At our divorce hearing, my husband leaned back in his expensive suit and sneered, telling the courtroom I would never see a single penny of his wealth. His pregnant mistress sat right behind him, smirking, as she whispered that I belonged on the street. They thought they had backed a boring accountant into a corner. But then the judge opened the single envelope I submitted as evidence. He read the first page, let out a loud, echoing laugh, and said, "Oh, this is incredibly good." In that split second, my husband's smug smile vanished, replaced by sheer panic as he finally realized exactly what I do for a living. My name is Lauren, and I am 34 years old. For years, I played the role of the dutiful, quiet wife, while my family treated me like an absolute inconvenience. But they forgot that I am a forensic financial analyst and numbers never lie. If you have ever been pushed to the edge by the people who were supposed to protect you, hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. You will definitely want to hear how I turned their cruel celebration into a federal crime scene. Growing up in the affluent suburbs of Boston, Massachusetts, my family cared about two things: social status and net worth. My mother, Catherine, and my father, William, measured human value by country club memberships and luxury cars. I was always the odd one out. I preferred analyzing data and uncovering financial discrepancies over attending lavish cocktail parties. My older sister, Natalie, was their undisputed golden child, a woman who treated life like a continuous fashion show. I was just the background character expected to work hard, stay quiet, and foot the bill when necessary. Despite managing my own independent consulting firm and working grueling 70-hour weeks, I always tried to meet their impossible standards. That Friday evening was supposed to be a milestone celebration. It was my mother's 65th birthday. I had left my office exhausted, my eyes burning from staring at encrypted financial ledgers all day, just to pick up the custom triple chocolate cake she had explicitly demanded. I navigated through heavy Boston traffic, carefully balancing the bakery box on my passenger seat, rehearsing how I would politely nod through her inevitable critiques about my practical work clothes. When I pulled into the sweeping circular driveway of my parents' estate, the house was blazing with lights. Several expensive cars were parked out front, including my husband Bradley's sleek black sports car. Bradley was a high-end commercial real estate broker. He loved the spotlight, loved the extravagant lifestyle, and loved reminding me that my job was entirely unglamorous compared to his. I assumed he had simply arrived early from a client dinner to help my parents set up for the evening. I balanced the heavy cake box in my arms and pushed open the heavy oak front door. The house smelled of expensive catering and floral arrangements. I could hear the clinking of crystal champagne flutes and the sound of loud, joyous laughter echoing from the main living room. Taking a deep breath to brace myself for my family's usual passive-aggressive comments, I stepped through the grand archway. Nothing could have prepared me for the scene waiting on the other side. Standing perfectly framed beneath the massive crystal chandelier in the center of the room was my husband Bradley, but he was not alone. His arm was wrapped possessively around the waist of Monica, his 28-year-old asset management partner. Monica was wearing a clinging, expensive silk dress that deliberately highlighted a very obvious, undeniable baby bump. She was resting her hand on her stomach, beaming up at Bradley with an expression of pure triumph. My father, William, stood right beside them, casually pouring Bradley a fresh glass of expensive scotch. My golden child sister, Natalie, sat gracefully on the velvet sofa, laughing loudly at something Monica had just said. Her husband, Jamal, a quiet and observant cybersecurity engineer, stood silently in the corner of the room, his dark eyes fixed on the floor. For a long moment, I simply stood in the entryway. The heavy chocolate cake felt like lead in my hands. The lively conversation died down as they finally noticed I was standing there. Bradley did not flinch. He did not drop his arm from Monica's waist. He did not look guilty, caught, or even mildly apologetic. Instead, he looked incredibly bored, as if my arrival was merely an irritating interruption to his perfect evening. "Lauren," Bradley said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "Put the cake down. We need to handle this right now." With his free hand, he reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He pulled out a thick, legal-sized manila envelope and tossed it casually onto the glass coffee table. It landed with a heavy, definitive thud that seemed to echo off the high ceilings. "Divorce papers," Bradley announced to the entire room, though his cold eyes remained locked dead on mine. "I am completely done, Lauren. You are a boring, work-obsessed accountant who brings absolutely zero value to my life. You care more about your tedious spreadsheets than you do about your own husband. Monica and I are having a boy. I have finally found real passionate love, and I want you packed and out of my house by tomorrow morning." The living room went dead silent. It was not a silence born of shock or horror. It was a silence born of cruel anticipation. They were waiting for me to break. They were waiting for the boring accountant to fall to her knees, to cry, to beg, to cause a scene that they could gossip about later. I looked slowly around the room, studying the faces of the people who shared my blood. My mother, Catherine, took a delicate sip of her wine, her eyes cold and calculating, showing zero sympathy for her youngest daughter. My father, William, adjusted his silk tie and deliberately looked away, completely unfazed by the fact that his son-in-law had just admitted to a massive betrayal right in his own home. My sister Natalie leaned back against the sofa cushions, a nasty smirk playing on her lips, clearly enjoying every single second of my public humiliation. They had all known. They had planned this. They had invited my husband and his pregnant mistress to a family birthday celebration, fully intending to ambush me and throw me out on the street. I tightened my grip on the cake box, my analytical mind instantly overriding the crushing pain in my chest. The tears they desperately wanted to see never came. Instead, a cold, absolute clarity washed over me. The game had just changed, and none of them realized they were playing against a professional. I shifted my gaze directly to the man who had raised me. I wanted to see if there was a single shred of paternal instinct left in him, or if his heart had been entirely replaced by a cold, calculating balance sheet. "Dad," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the spacious living room without a single tremor. "You are standing in your own home drinking scotch with the man who just admitted to betraying your daughter. You are actually letting him humiliate me right in front of you." William set his crystal glass down on the side table. The sharp clink of the glass against the expensive wood sounded incredibly loud in the tense room. He did not look ashamed in the slightest. He looked entirely inconvenienced. He adjusted the cuffs of his tailored dress shirt, taking a deliberate moment to smooth out the fine fabric before finally meeting my eyes. "Let us be entirely rational about this, Lauren." William began using the exact same clinical tone he used when terminating an underperforming employee at his firm. "You are 34 years old. You are not a child, and this is not a cheap television melodrama. Bradley manages our family's $2 million retirement fund. Do you have any idea what the market is doing right now? He secured us a 12% yield last quarter alone. He is actively doubling our returns. I am certainly not going to jeopardize my financial security and my comfortable retirement just because you could not manage to keep your own husband entertained." The sheer audacity of his statement hung heavily in the warm air of the living room. My own father was actively endorsing my husband's infidelity. He was entirely willing to watch me be thrown out onto the street because he firmly believed Bradley was the key to making him even richer. "You failed in your marriage, Lauren?" William continued, his voice completely devoid of any warmth or empathy. "Take responsibility for your own shortcomings, and do not make a scene in my house. Business is business, and right now Bradley is providing immense financial value to this family. You simply audit spreadsheets for a living. You need to understand your proper place in this equation." They did not see me as a human being. They saw me as a defective asset that was no longer yielding social or financial dividends. I was a liability on their perfect ledger, and they were aggressively cutting their losses without a second thought. My mother stepped forward, gliding smoothly across the Persian rug. She did not walk toward me to offer a comforting embrace. Instead, Catherine moved directly to Monica's side. She reached out with her perfectly manicured hand and delicately lifted Monica's left hand to admire the massive diamond engagement ring sparkling under the chandelier. I immediately recognized the cut and the platinum setting. It was a wildly expensive piece, undoubtedly purchased with funds siphoned directly from the business accounts I meticulously managed for Bradley. You really need to be realistic about your situation, Catherine chimed in, keeping her eyes fixed on the brilliant diamond rather than looking at her own flesh and blood. Bradley is keeping the house, Lauren. It is only fair and logical. The baby needs a proper spacious nursery, and that neighborhood has an excellent school district. Monica will need the space to host playdates and neighborhood gatherings. You can easily rent a small, sensible apartment downtown closer to your little accounting office. A one-bedroom is perfectly adequate for a single woman with your lifestyle. Catherine released Monica's hand and finally gave me a passing glance, her expression radiating pure disdain. We are going to throw the most beautiful baby shower next month, right there in the garden of that house. Catherine added, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness as she smiled warmly at Bradley's mistress. You will have to give me the guest list early, Monica dear. I want to make sure the catering is absolutely flawless. Then Catherine turned that cold gaze back to me. Leave your house keys on the kitchen counter tomorrow morning, Lauren. Do not drag this out and embarrass us further. We have important friends coming to town next week, and I will not have them gossiping about your messy divorce. My older sister Natalie could not resist joining the firing squad. She shifted gracefully on the velvet sofa, crossing her long legs and letting out a loud theatrical scoff. Natalie had always been the center of our parents' universe, a woman who treated everyday life like a continuous fashion show, and viewed my practical nature as a personal insult to her glamorous existence. Stop being so incredibly dramatic, Lauren, Natalie said, rolling her eyes and swirling the champagne in her flute. Bradley has been miserable with you for years. We have all seen it. You never attend the country club mixers, you absolutely refuse to network with the right people, and you just sit locked in your dreary office tracking numbers all day. You bring zero social capital to the table. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is to constantly explain your boring career to my friends? Every time I host a charity luncheon, people ask what my little sister is up to, and I have to pretend your consulting firm is somehow exciting. Natalie uncrossed her legs and leaned forward, directing a warm, conspiratorial smile toward Monica. Monica is a managing partner. She deals with high net worth individuals. She actually belongs in our world. She is good for his image in the commercial real estate sector. She understands how things work. She goes to the galas, she knows how to host a high-profile dinner party without talking about tax codes and compliance laws, and she actually makes an effort to fit in with our circles. Plus, she is giving him a son to carry on his name. Natalie leaned back against the plush cushions, a nasty, victorious smirk playing on her lips. She was clearly enjoying every single second of my public execution. You have always been the embarrassing outlier, Lauren. It is a massive relief that we no longer have to pretend you fit in. You should be happy for him, honestly. He is finally getting the family and the partner he truly deserves. Just sign the divorce papers, pack your cheap suits, and move on. Nobody here is going to take your side. William nodded slowly, backing up his golden child. Your sister is exactly right. We have spent years trying to integrate you into a higher caliber of society, and you have fought us at every single turn. Bradley is a man of intense ambition. He needs a partner who matches his drive, not a ball and chain dragging his social standing down into the mud. I will not allow you to disrupt his professional trajectory or my financial portfolio just because your feelings are hurt. Bradley stood taller, his chest puffed out with sheer arrogance, reveling in the absolute validation he was receiving from my own family. Monica rested her head lovingly against his shoulder, shooting me a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. They had successfully turned my entire support system against me, leaving me completely isolated in a room full of people who shared my last name but possessed none of my loyalty. The air in the living room felt thick and suffocating. Any normal person would have shattered completely under the weight of this combined betrayal. Any normal wife would have screamed, thrown the heavy cake across the room, or collapsed onto the hardwood floor in a pathetic puddle of tears and devastation. That was exactly the reaction they were eagerly waiting for. They wanted to witness my complete breakdown so they could justify their cruelty, so they could easily label me unstable and wash their hands of me forever. But they severely underestimated the woman standing in front of them. I carefully adjusted my grip on the heavy bakery box. Slowly, deliberately, I walked over to the antique console table by the entryway. The scent of expensive catering, a sickening mix of truffle oil, roasted lamb, and vintage champagne, suddenly made my stomach turn. I forced my facial muscles to remain entirely relaxed. I set the triple chocolate cake down, making sure it was perfectly centered on the polished mahogany surface. I took a sanitizing wipe from my purse and methodically cleaned the faint trace of frosting from my fingertips. The silence in the room stretched thick and heavy as they waited for my breakdown. They were practically salivating for it. I tossed the used wipe into a nearby wastebasket. Then I turned back to face my executioners. I looked at Bradley first. His smug grin faltered slightly, as my expression remained completely impassive. "I accept your terms, Bradley," I said, my voice steady and cold, carrying through the grand living room like a physical chill. "You want a divorce, you have it. You want me out of the house, I will be gone before the sun comes up." Bradley blinked clearly, thrown off balance by my immediate capitulation. He had prepared for a massive fight, a hysterical scene he could record and use against me in court to prove I was unstable. He had not prepared for absolute icy indifference. Just like that, Natalie sneered from the velvet sofa, crossing her arms defensively. "No begging, no crying. You are even colder and more detached than I originally thought, Lauren. This is exactly why your marriage failed." "There is nothing left to cry over, Natalie," I replied, shifting my gaze to my older sister. "You all made your positions abundantly clear tonight. You value social climbing and financial illusions over basic human decency. I am not going to beg for a place in a family that treats loyalty as a highly negotiable transactional commodity." I looked at my mother and father. Catherine was aggressively adjusting her pearl necklace, refusing to meet my eyes while William swirled the scotch in his glass, his jaw tight and rigid. "Mom, Dad!" I continued, making sure my tone was loud enough for every guest in the adjacent rooms to hear clearly. "I hope the 12% yield on your retirement fund is worth the price of your youngest daughter. I genuinely hope Bradley's commercial real estate ventures keep your country club memberships fully funded for years to come, because as of this exact second you no longer have a second child. I am removing myself from your ledger entirely." William stiffened his face, flushing a deep, angry red. "Do not speak to us with that disrespectful tone in our own home, Lauren. We are simply being practical about a bad situation. You are acting entirely ungracious and immature." "I am being forensic," I corrected him sharply. "I am looking directly at the facts presented to me. The fact is that my husband has been cheating on me with his subordinate. The fact is that my own family orchestrated a public ambush to protect their financial interests. The fact is that none of you possess a single shred of integrity." I turned my attention back to Bradley and his pregnant mistress. Monica shifted uncomfortably under my intense scrutiny, her hand dropping awkwardly from her baby bump as the triumphant smile melted off her face. She was expecting a shattered victim, not a predator calculating her next strike. "Bradley," I said, stepping closer to the glass coffee table where the divorce papers lay. I picked up the thick manila envelope and tucked it under my arm. "I will sign whatever needs to be signed. We will execute a clean, absolute break. But hear me clearly. From this exact moment forward, what is mine is completely mine, and what is yours is entirely yours. There will be no mediation. There will be no friendly compromises. We are operating strictly by the numbers now." Bradley scoffed, rapidly recovering his arrogant posture. "That is perfectly fine by me, Lauren. My numbers are significantly bigger than yours anyway. My lawyers will absolutely crush your little consulting firm if you try to take a single dime of my real assets." "We will definitely see about that," I whispered, a dark, dangerous promise disguised as a simple statement. As I turned to leave, my eyes swept the expansive room one final time. That was when I saw him. Jamal, Natalie's husband, was standing in the shadowy corner near the towering oak bookshelves. As an African-American cybersecurity engineer, Jamal was brilliant, perceptive, and entirely out of place in my family's shallow, status-obsessed world. He had endured their subtle microaggressions and blatant condescension for years, always keeping his sharp thoughts carefully hidden behind a stoic expression. Unlike the rest of the room, Jamal was not looking at me with disdain, mockery, or pity. His dark eyes were razor-sharp, locked onto mine with an intensity that cut straight through the heavy tension. He stood perfectly still, his hands casually shoved in his pockets, but his gaze communicated volumes. He saw the absolute truth of the situation. He saw right through Bradley's flashy facade and my father's greedy justifications. More importantly, he saw the calculated restraint in my posture. Jamal was the only person in this sprawling, superficial house who actually understood the mechanics of the modern digital world. He knew exactly how easily data could be manipulated, tracked, and exposed. For a fraction of a second, the rest of the room completely faded away. Jamal gave me a single, slow, deliberate nod. It was barely perceptible, a micro-expression that nobody else in the room caught. But I caught it. It was a silent confirmation of an unspoken alliance. It was a mutual acknowledgement that we were the only two intelligent people in a room full of arrogant fools. I held his gaze for a heartbeat longer, offering a nearly invisible nod in return. Message received. We were on the exact same wavelength. I adjusted my purse on my shoulder and walked toward the grand entryway. I did not rush. I did not stumble. My heels clicked rhythmically against the polished hardwood floors, echoing like the ticking of a deadly countdown clock. Every single step I took away from my family felt like a heavy steel chain snapping. For 34 years, I had bent over backward trying to prove my worth to a mother who only valued country club gossip and a father who only respected aggressive financial dominance. I was done shrinking. "Do not forget to leave the house keys on the counter tomorrow morning, Lauren," Catherine called out behind me, her voice shrill and desperate to have the final word. I reached the heavy oak front door, gripped the solid brass handle, and pulled it open. The cool evening air washed over my face, carrying the distinct scent of impending rain. I stepped out into the dark night and pulled the door firmly shut behind me. It clicked with a solid, resonant finality. There was no dramatic door slam. There was no screaming match on the front lawn. There was only the cold, hard reality of absolute severance. As I walked down the sweeping driveway toward my car, a profound sense of liberation replaced the initial shock of betrayal. They thought they had successfully discarded a weak, boring accountant. They thought they had permanently secured their wealth and social standing by aligning with a flashy commercial real estate broker. They had made a catastrophic miscalculation. They had just declared total war on a forensic financial analyst with unlimited access to their digital footprints and intimate knowledge of their corporate structures, and absolutely nothing left to lose. I slid into the driver's seat of my car, tossing the divorce papers onto the passenger seat. I started the engine, the low hum grounding me in the present moment. I pulled out of the estate, leaving my toxic family and my cheating husband in the rearview mirror forever. The tears they had desperately wanted to witness would never fall. I had a bank account to dismantle, a hidden financial empire to uncover, and a massive, devastating score to settle. By 8 o'clock the next morning, I was already sitting at my custom-built desk in my downtown office. The space was a fortress of digital security. 3 encrypted monitors glowed in the dim light of the room, casting a pale blue reflection across my face. I had not slept a single minute. Instead, I had spent the entire night drinking black coffee and securing every single one of my personal and business accounts. I changed passwords, updated two-factor authentication protocols, and transferred my operational funds into a newly established corporate account that Bradley did not even know existed. I was locking down my fortress before the enemy could even load their weapons. Right on schedule, a high-priority email pinged in my inbox. It was from a senior partner at one of the most aggressive, notoriously expensive family law firms in Boston. Bradley had certainly not wasted any time. He had probably retained this shark weeks ago, plotting this exact sequence of events while smiling at me across our dinner table. I opened the encrypted document attached to the email. The file was 50 pages of legal aggression designed specifically to overwhelm, intimidate, and financially break a standard spouse before they could even mount a proper defense. But I was not a standard spouse. I scrolled through the initial pages, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon with practiced speed. Bradley was demanding an expedited divorce. He wanted absolute possession of our Beacon Hill home, claiming that since he paid the initial property taxes last year, he held the primary equity interest. He also requested that I be barred from seeking any spousal support, citing my independent consulting firm as proof of my financial self-sufficiency. It was a classic bully tactic. Hit hard, hit fast, and demand everything so the victim feels incredibly lucky to walk away with scraps. Then I reached page 12, and I actually had to stop and read the paragraph twice. According to the official financial disclosure attached to the filing, Bradley was claiming that his luxury commercial real estate firm was on the verge of total collapse. The man who had just stood in my living room wearing a $4,000 suit and bragging about 12% yield returns was now officially declaring near bankruptcy. His legal team had included a highly manipulated profit and loss statement. The document showed massive quarterly losses citing sudden market downturns, lost commercial leases, and failed property acquisitions. They had painted a detailed picture of a man drowning in corporate failure. I leaned closer to the monitor. The audacity was almost impressive. Bradley was deliberately tanking his own company on paper to avoid paying me a single dime in the divorce settlement. He was trying to ensure that his net worth appeared essentially non-existent on the marital ledger. But the real gut punch, the absolute height of his malicious greed, was buried on page 22 under the section labeled Marital Liabilities. Bradley was claiming that we shared a massive undocumented marital debt. He alleged that his real estate firm had taken out a $500,000 emergency business loan to stay afloat during a difficult quarter. According to his lawyer, because this loan was acquired during our marriage and was supposedly used to maintain our joint lifestyle, I was legally responsible for exactly half of it. He was demanding that I immediately liquidate my private consulting firm to cover $250,000 of this fabricated phantom debt. I stared at the specific account numbers and the supposed loan origination dates listed in the filing. My mind immediately went to work processing the variables, calculating the timelines, and spotting the glaring, undeniable inconsistencies. First, Bradley and I had strictly maintained separate business finances from the day we got married. I had insisted on it. I never signed a single document guaranteeing a commercial loan for his brokerage. Second, a sudden $500,000 cash injection would leave a massive digital footprint. It would show up in tax filings, operational overheads, or payroll distributions. But looking at the preliminary numbers his lawyer had hastily compiled, there was no matching cash flow. The math was incredibly sloppy. He was trying to force me to sell my entire business, the company I had built from the ground up, with my own sweat and sleepless nights, to pay off a debt that simply did not exist. He wanted to leave me homeless, bankrupt, and professionally ruined while he moved his pregnant mistress into my house and continued managing my parents' money. He thought I would panic. He thought I would look at that staggering $500,000 figure and immediately surrender out of pure terror. He expected me to call his lawyer crying and begging for a settlement plan. He expected me to blindly trust the financial statements provided by a man who had been lying to my face for over a year. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and took a slow, deep breath. A cold, dangerous calm settled deep in my chest. Bradley had made the most fatal error a criminal can make. He had assumed his victim was stupid. He was a salesman. He knew how to pitch properties, how to schmooze wealthy clients at the country club, and how to forge surface-level documents to look legitimate to an untrained eye. But he did not understand the underlying architecture of modern finance. He did not realize that money never truly vanishes. It simply changes shape. It moves from one column to another, leaving a permanent, undeniable trail of digital breadcrumbs. And tracing those breadcrumbs was exactly what I did better than anyone else in Boston. I did not call his lawyer. I did not call my parents. I reached out and pulled my secondary keyboard toward me, the one connected directly to my firm's proprietary auditing network. I cracked my knuckles, the sound sharp in the quiet office. Bradley wanted to play a numbers game. He wanted to weaponize financial data to destroy my life. I was going to show him exactly what a real financial weapon looked like. Before I could type the first line of code, my personal cell phone buzzed violently on the desk. I glanced down at the bright screen. It was an alert from my social media monitoring app. Monica had just posted a public update. I unlocked the screen and opened the application. There, displayed in high resolution for all our mutual acquaintances, colleagues, and family members to see, was a live video feed of Monica standing in the exact center of my custom-designed kitchen. She was wearing a cashmere lounge set, holding a mug of herbal tea, and gently rubbing her stomach. The camera panned around the room, showcasing the imported Italian marble countertops and the brass fixtures I had personally selected and paid for just 2 years ago. "Moving day is finally here," Monica cooed to the camera, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Bradley and I are just so incredibly blessed. We are finally settling into our forever home. It is so exhausting clearing out the old, outdated energy, but this house is absolutely perfect for our growing family. Sometimes you just have to take out the trash to make room for the queen." She ended the video by blowing a kiss to the lens. The hashtag below the post read, "New Beginnings Boy, Mom, and Upgrades." I stared at the screen, analyzing the absolute brazenness of the move. Bradley had not even waited 24 hours. The ink on his absurd divorce filing was not even dry, yet he was already moving his pregnant mistress into the master bedroom of a $1.5 million home he did not legally own. He was so incredibly confident in his ability to bully me into submission that he felt entirely comfortable parading his infidelity across the internet. My phone vibrated again. Another notification popped up, then another. Monica was uploading a rapid-fire sequence of photos to her stories. The first photo showed Bradley carrying a stack of designer shopping boxes through my front door. The caption read, "My strong man making sure his girls have everything they need." The second photo was a close-up of her diamond ring resting on the edge of my antique mahogany dining table. The third image was the one that truly showcased the depth of the betrayal. It was a candid shot of Monica standing in my backyard garden. Sitting next to her holding a cup of coffee and smiling brightly at the camera was my sister Natalie. The caption was a knife aimed directly at my chest. "So grateful for my amazing new sister-in-law helping me plan the perfect baby shower. Family is everything." I clicked on the engagement metrics. The post already had hundreds of likes. I scrolled through the comment section and felt a cold knot form in my stomach. My mother, Catherine, had commented with 3 heart emojis and a message saying she could not wait to see the nursery decorations. Other women from the country club people I had hosted for charity dinners and holiday parties were chiming in with congratulations. Nobody asked about me. Nobody questioned why Bradley was suddenly starting a new family in the house I had occupied just yesterday. They simply accepted the narrative Bradley and my family had meticulously spun. They eagerly embraced the shiny new upgrade and discarded me without a single backward glance. Monica was waging a psychological war. She was using social media to publicly humiliate me to mark her territory and to broadcast her victory to the entire commercial real estate sector. She wanted me to feel small. She wanted me to feel utterly replaced and completely isolated. She expected me to crumble under the weight of the public shame, to deactivate my accounts in a panic, and to hide from the world. Instead, I opened a new folder on my encrypted desktop. I named it Exhibit A. I systematically downloaded every single video, every photograph, and every comment. I captured the timestamps and the location tags. Monica thought she was rubbing her victory in my face. In reality, she was handing me a meticulously documented timeline of her illegal occupation of my property. She was publicly linking herself to the assets Bradley was attempting to steal. She was providing time-stamped evidence of my family's active complicity in marital fraud. I watched the video of her in my kitchen one more time. I noted the expensive designer bags stacked on my kitchen island. I noted the brand-new luxury SUV parked in my driveway through the window behind her. Bradley was claiming near bankruptcy in his official legal filings, citing massive corporate losses and a crippling $500,000 debt. Yet here was his mistress broadcasting a lifestyle of unchecked luxury and massive cash expenditures to the entire internet. The sheer stupidity of their arrogance was staggering. They were so blinded by their own greed and their desire to inflict emotional pain that they completely forgot they were dealing with a woman who builds criminal cases out of financial discrepancies for a living. I closed the social media application and placed my phone face down on the desk. The initial sting of seeing a stranger claim my home had faded, replaced by a hyper-focused clinical detachment. Let Monica have the kitchen for now. Let her enjoy the Italian marble and the antique dining table. Let my mother and sister play house with the new mistress. They were rearranging furniture on the deck of a sinking ship. They had no idea that I held the title to that property through an ironclad anonymous trust. They had no idea that their public celebration was about to become the central piece of evidence in a massive federal fraud investigation. I turned my attention back to the triple monitors in front of me. I cracked my knuckles once more, the sound sharp and final in the quiet office. I initiated the secure connection to my auditing software. It was time to find out exactly where Bradley got the money to buy that diamond ring and how he planned to fund his glamorous new life. The social media show was over. The real financial autopsy was officially underway. Before my fingers could even strike the first command key to initiate the deep dive into Bradley's offshore routing protocols, the sharp ring of my desk phone shattered the silence of my office. I glanced at the caller ID display. It was a joint call from my parents' landline in the suburbs. They were not calling to check on my emotional well-being. They were calling to close a business deal. I reached out and pressed the speaker button, letting their voices echo in my secure office while my hands remained free to hover over my keyboard. I also hit the record button on my secondary terminal. Massachusetts is a two-party consent state, but I was not recording this for a courtroom. I was recording this for my own personal ledger. "Lauren, are you listening to me?" William's voice boomed through the speaker before I had even offered a greeting. He was using his golf course executive voice, the one designed to make subordinates shrink in their chairs. "I am here, Dad," I replied, my tone flat and unyielding. "Good. I assume you have read the legal demands Bradley sent over this morning." William continued, completely ignoring the fact that his daughter had just been thrown out of her home the previous night. "I have just gotten off the phone with him. He is being incredibly generous under the circumstances, Lauren. You need to accept this arrangement immediately. The commercial real estate market is brutal right now, and his firm took a massive hit. You are legally tethered to that $500,000 marital debt." "There is no debt, Dad," I stated, pulling up a blank spreadsheet on my right monitor and preparing to take notes. "I never signed a single commercial loan document. Bradley is falsifying his liabilities to extort me." "Stop acting like a paranoid child," Catherine snapped, her voice cutting through the speaker with shrill irritation. "You have always been so unnecessarily stubborn. Bradley is drowning in corporate overhead. You shared a life with him, and now you have to share the financial burden of his business restructuring. It is basic mathematics, Lauren. You have that consulting firm of yours. You have clients. Liquidate the business, sell your client list to a competitor, and pay your half of the debt. $250,000 is a small price to pay for a clean, quiet exit." I stopped typing. The sheer magnitude of their betrayal settled heavily over me. My own mother was demanding that I destroy my entire career, sell the company I built with my own hands, and hand the cash over to my cheating husband. "You want me to bankrupt myself?" I said, slowly testing the boundaries of their greed. "You want me to lose my livelihood so Bradley can move his pregnant mistress into my house without any financial inconveniences?" "It is not your house anymore, Lauren," Catherine retorted sharply. "Monica is moving in because they need the space for the baby. You need to be sensible. If you drag this out into a nasty public litigation, you are going to drag our family name through the mud. We have galas to attend. We have a reputation to maintain. I will not have my friends at the country club whispering about my youngest daughter dragging her wealthy husband through a bitter trial over a business loan." "It is not about the country club, Mom," I countered, my eyes narrowing at the speakerphone. "You do not care about a few whispers over brunch, and Dad certainly does not care about Bradley's supposed corporate overhead. So let us stop playing games. Why are you really pushing so hard for me to sign away my life?" A heavy silence fell over the line. I could hear them breathing. I could hear the faint sound of ice clinking in William's glass. He was pacing. I knew his habits. He was calculating how much truth he needed to reveal to force my compliance. Because Bradley is structuring a massive new commercial investment fund. William finally barked his patience, completely exhausted. A massive fund, Lauren. We are talking tens of millions of dollars in managed assets, and he has guaranteed that Natalie will be the primary portfolio manager. Do you understand what that means? I understood perfectly. The final piece of the puzzle clicked securely into place. A commission, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Bradley promised Natalie a management commission. It is not just a commission, Catherine interjected eagerly, her greed completely overpowering any remaining maternal instinct. It is a finder's fee and a permanent management cut. It will set your sister up for the rest of her life. She and Jamal will never have to worry about money again. Bradley is treating this family incredibly well, Lauren, but he made it absolutely clear. He will only finalize Natalie's contract if his divorce goes smoothly. If you tie up his assets in court, he loses the seed money for the new fund, and your sister loses the biggest financial opportunity of her career. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glowing screens in front of me. The depth of their depravity was staggering. They were not just abandoning me, they were actively trading my financial execution for Natalie's corporate kickback. Bradley had literally bought my family's loyalty, using my own stolen assets as the bargaining chip. Let me get this completely straight, I said, articulating every single syllable with razor-sharp precision. You want me to sell my consulting firm, assume $250,000 in fake debt, and walk away with absolutely nothing. Also, Natalie can collect a fat commission check from the man who just blew up my marriage. You are being incredibly selfish, Lauren, William growled. You have always been selfish. You only care about your own little numbers. Your sister is stepping into a major society role. This fund will elevate the entire family. You are going to take the hit for the greater good of this family. Sign the papers, liquidate your firm, and pay the man. Do not make me ruin you myself. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell. I spoke with the icy authority of a woman who held the keys to their complete destruction. Listen to me very carefully, William, I said, dropping the title of father forever. I am not liquidating my firm. I am not paying a single dime toward a fabricated loan. And I am absolutely not funding Natalie's kickback. You made a terrible bet on a bad asset. Goodbye. Lauren, if you hang up this phone, Catherine shrieked. I pressed the glowing red button on the console, cutting off her threat instantly. The office returned to absolute silence. I sat alone with the hum of my servers and the stark reality of my situation. My family had sold me to the highest bidder. They had reduced my entire existence to a collateral sacrifice for their own greed. I turned my attention back to the primary monitor, my hands hovering over the keyboard. The lingering sting of betrayal evaporated entirely, consumed by the thrill of the hunt. Bradley thought he was a mastermind. My parents thought they were ruthless business people. They were about to learn what true ruthlessness looked like. I typed in the first set of extraction commands. The real financial autopsy was officially underway. The transition was instantaneous. Any lingering trace of the devoted wife who had baked a custom triple chocolate cake just 24 hours ago vanished entirely. She was replaced by a machine. My heartbeat slowed to a steady, rhythmic thumping, aligning perfectly with the blinking cursor on my primary monitor. For 7 years, I had respected the boundaries of our marriage. I had kept my professional auditing software away from Bradley's personal and corporate accounts. I had trusted him implicitly. But trust is a liability in the world of forensic accounting. Now the gloves were off. I initiated a secure scrape of public property tax records, cross-referencing them with the state corporate registries. Bradley assumed that because he handled the physical cash flows and the client dinners, I was blind to the underlying digital architecture. He was mistaken. Money always leaves a permanent fingerprint. Every wire transfer, every loan origination, every offshore routing number creates a ripple in the data pool. My job was simply to find the origin of the splash. I started with the most obvious target. I zeroed in on the fabricated $500,000 marital debt his lawyer had so proudly presented in the divorce filing. According to Bradley's falsified profit and loss statements, His commercial real estate brokerage had suffered a catastrophic liquidity crisis exactly 6 months ago. He claimed this emergency business loan was secured to cover operational overhead, massive payroll demands, and sudden commercial lease defaults. I pulled up the state commercial lien registry on my left monitor. If a legitimate financial institution had handed Bradley $500,000, there would absolutely be a recorded Uniform Commercial Code filing. A real bank always secures its financial interests. I ran the targeted search. The database returned 0 results. There was absolutely no institutional lien against his brokerage anywhere in the state of Massachusetts. I smirked at the glowing screen. Bradley had not borrowed money from a bank. He had borrowed it from a private entity, or much more likely, he had simply created a phantom ledger entry to justify siphoning vast amounts of funds out of his own company. To find out which scenario was true, I desperately needed to break down his daily operational cash flow. I accessed a highly specialized financial database that aggregates corporate vendor payments and banking transit histories. I began filtering the massive volume of results by his firm's specific corporate tax identification number. The raw data poured across my secondary monitor in endless cascading rows of green text. I aggressively scanned the expenditures from the past 12 months. The overhead costs for his luxurious downtown Boston office space remained perfectly consistent. His monthly payroll disbursements showed 0 negative fluctuations. His utility bills and standard vendor payments were entirely routine. There was absolutely no corporate liquidity crisis. His business was not failing in the slightest. It was actively thriving. The entire bankruptcy narrative was a shabbily constructed lie designed specifically to terrify me into blindly liquidating my own consulting firm. But if the business was thriving, where were the massive profits going? A highly successful commercial real estate broker in the heart of Boston generates staggering commission payouts. Bradley had closed 3 major high-rise acquisitions in the last quarter alone. Those specific deals should have flooded his corporate operating accounts with millions in liquid capital. Yet his official legal disclosure claimed his accounts were nearly empty. I shifted my intense focus to the outflow metrics. I ran a predictive machine learning algorithm designed specifically to flag anomalous wire transfers and sudden cash movements. The software took less than 3 minutes to highlight a glaring, highly repetitive pattern. On the 15th of every single month, exactly 48 hours after Bradley's firm received its major commission deposits, massive blocks of cash were being permanently wired out. These were not minor operational transactions. We were looking at rapid transfers of $50,000, $75,000, and sometimes upwards of $150,000 at a single time. I highlighted the routing numbers for the outbound wires. The ultimate destination was not a domestic vendor or a recognized corporate business partner. The money was being funneled into an intermediary holding account at a secretive boutique private bank located in Delaware. This specific bank was notorious in forensic auditing circles for offering expedited offshore routing services to high-net-worth individuals. Bradley was aggressively washing the money. He was taking his legitimate corporate profits, moving them quickly through a domestic transit hub, and then flushing them entirely out of the country to hide them from the marital estate and the Internal Revenue Service. My fingers flew across the illuminated keyboard as I executed a complex reverse tracing protocol on the Delaware Transit account. I needed to see exactly where those stolen funds were landing after they left the heavily regulated domestic banking system. The adrenaline rushed through my veins, sharp and electric. This was the reason my consulting firm commanded premium rates from top-tier corporate clients across the country. I could see the story the hidden numbers were trying to tell. Bradley was being sloppy. He was relying on brute force arrogance rather than sophisticated financial layering techniques. He believed that an offshore transit maneuver would be enough to conceal millions of dollars from a woman who dismantled corporate fraud syndicates for a living. I opened an encrypted window and began preparing a subpoena request template. I would not need to file it myself. I would hand it directly to the federal authorities when the timing was perfect. I watched the progress bar on my tracing software inch forward, digging through the digital banking layers. The truth was unraveling right in front of me, thread by digital thread. Bradley's fake bankruptcy, the phantom marital loan, the missing commercial commissions. It was all an interconnected illusion built on arrogance. And I was about to shatter the glass house into a million pieces. The digital hunt was now engaged. The progress bar on my tracing software glowed a solid, vibrant green, signaling the absolute completion of the reverse routing protocol. The Delaware boutique bank was not the final resting place for Bradley's stolen millions. It was merely a high-speed revolving door designed to confuse standard audits. My software meticulously mapped the outbound trajectory. Within 60 seconds of hitting the Delaware account, the massive funds were chopped into smaller randomized fractional transactions. This is a classic financial laundering technique known as smurfing. It is designed specifically to evade federal tracking triggers and bypass standard currency transaction reports that automatically alert government regulators. Bradley was actively trying to mask the volume of his cash flow, but he severely underestimated the processing power of a dedicated forensic server. My algorithm grabbed every single fractional transaction, tagged the unique digital identifiers, and followed the wake straight out into the Atlantic Ocean. The money was washing ashore in the Cayman Islands. The Cayman Islands represent the holy grail for corporate embezzlers, tax evaders, and cheating spouses alike. They offer incredibly aggressive banking secrecy laws and heavily shielded corporate registries. A standard divorce attorney would hit this geographical wall, throw their hands up in defeat, and force their client to settle for pennies on the dollar. I simply adjusted my posture, cracked my neck, and launched a secondary, highly specialized decryption tool. Because of my high-level corporate consulting work, I possessed authorized access credentials to international compliance databases. These were hunting tools normally reserved for dismantling international syndicates, not handling suburban divorces. I initiated a cross-border asset discovery protocol, pushing past the surface-level privacy barriers that protected offshore wealth. The system churned heavily through the international ledgers. The cooling fans on my computer tower kicked into high gear as the software processed thousands of encrypted records. Slowly, the structural blueprints of Bradley's fraud materialized on my screen. He had not just opened a hidden savings account to stash a little extra cash. He had engineered a fully operational, multi-tiered network of shell companies. I counted 6 distinct limited liability companies, all registered to a single anonymous commercial post office box in Grand Cayman. They had incredibly generic, corporate-sounding names designed to blend into the background of global finance. Apex Horizon Holdings, Zenith Global Ventures, Pinnacle Asset Management. It was a textbook setup for hiding massive amounts of capital. I began aggressively downloading the incorporation charters and the articles of organization for each specific shell company. In the world of offshore finance, the true owner usually hides behind a complex web of nominee directors or proxy shareholders. They pay exorbitant fees to local Caribbean law firms to put their names on the public documents, keeping the actual beneficial owner completely invisible to investigators. Bradley, however, was incredibly arrogant. He was a man who loved seeing his accomplishments in writing. He felt so utterly untouchable, so confident that his boring accountant wife would never dig this deep that he skipped the expensive proxy layers entirely. I opened the primary ownership declaration for Apex Horizon Holdings, the master shell company that seemed to control the other 5 entities. I scrolled directly past the legal boilerplate to the signature line at the bottom of the document. The registered beneficial owner was not Bradley. It was not a faceless corporate attorney. It was Monica. Her full legal name, her date of birth, and her electronic signature were stamped prominently across every single offshore document. I leaned closer to the monitors, my eyes darting rapidly between the offshore ownership records and the transaction ledgers. The reality of the situation was far more sinister than a simple workplace affair. Monica was not just a naive social climbing mistress playing house in my stolen living room and posting vapid selfies on the internet. She was the designated bagman. She was the primary legal accomplice in a massive, highly coordinated asset concealment operation. Bradley was legally transferring his untaxed corporate profits to his mistress across international borders. He was actively committing severe marital fraud by hiding these assets from the divorce proceedings. But by involving the Cayman Islands, utilizing wire fraud techniques, and actively hiding the assets to evade the Internal Revenue Service, he had elevated his petty divorce scheme into a major federal crime. I pulled up the financial disclosure that Bradley's shark of a lawyer had sent me that morning. I located the specific line item detailing the fabricated $500,000 marital debt. His legal team claimed this was an emergency business loan taken out to save his failing commercial real estate firm. I cross-referenced that exact dollar amount with the Cayman Island wire logs currently displaying on my secondary screen. The match was absolutely flawless. Exactly 6 months ago, on the precise date, Bradley claimed his firm was forced to take out an emergency business loan to survive a liquidity crisis. An outbound wire for $500,000 had hit the Delaware Transit Hub. 24 hours later, that exact amount landed directly in Monica's primary Cayman account. The sheer scale of their stupidity was truly breathtaking. They were actively trying to force me to liquidate my consulting firm to pay off a fake commercial loan, while the actual cash was sitting in Monica's offshore portfolio earning tax-free interest. Bradley had literally handed me the digital murder weapon with his own fingerprints pressed deeply into the metal. The game was no longer just about securing my fair share of the marital estate or keeping my house. It was about absolute surgical annihilation. I created a new secure folder on my encrypted drive. I dragged the Cayman Island Incorporation documents, the wire transfer logs, and the fabricated divorce demands into the file. Every single piece of paper was another nail in Bradley's coffin. I was not just building a divorce defense anymore. I was building a comprehensive federal indictment. I stared at the newly created folder on my desktop, feeling a surge of pure adrenaline. The $500,000 transfer to Monica's offshore account was the smoking gun, but in forensic accounting, a resting pile of cash is rarely the end of the story. Criminals who steal that kind of capital do not just let it sit idle in a Caribbean vault. They spend it. They buy expensive toys to validate their inflated egos. I needed to know exactly what my husband had purchased with the money he was actively trying to extort from my business. I targeted the outbound transaction logs for Apex Horizon Holdings. For 3 weeks after the initial deposit, the account remained entirely dormant. Then a massive withdrawal triggered my tracking software. $485,000 was wired back into the United States, landing squarely in the corporate account of a high-end marine brokerage located in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. My eyes narrowed at the screen. A marine brokerage? Bradley was not investing in real estate or securing commercial assets. He was buying a boat. I immediately accessed the Florida Department of Revenue's public vessel registration database. Searching by the exact date of the wire transfer and the offshore LLC name yielded an instant, undeniable match. The asset was a custom-built 55-foot luxury motor yacht. I pulled up the digitized bill of sale and the official state registration forms. The specifications listed on the dealership invoice included imported teak wood decking, dual high-performance marine engines, and a custom-designed outdoor entertainment lounge. The vessel was registered under Apex Horizon Holdings, but the designated managing member and primary signatory on all the delivery documents was Monica. She had even signed the luxury tax evasion forms claiming the vessel would be moored internationally to avoid state tariffs. I leaned closer to the monitor, reading the name they had officially registered for the yacht. It was printed in bold, undeniable letters across the federal maritime documentation. The Queen's Escape. A harsh, humorless laugh escaped my throat. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of the man was almost impossible to process. Bradley had completely fabricated a catastrophic liquidity crisis within his commercial real estate firm. He had forged a $500,000 corporate loan document and submitted it to a family court judge under the penalty of perjury. He was aggressively demanding that I liquidate my entire forensic consulting firm, the business I had built with years of sleepless nights and relentless grind to cover exactly half of that fake debt. He wanted me to destroy my career, drain my operational capital, and hand him $250,000 in cash. And he wanted that money so he could subsidize a luxury yacht for his 28-year-old pregnant mistress. He was literally attempting to force his wife to buy a boat for his new girlfriend. The puzzle pieces locked together with sickening clarity. Bradley was not just a cheating husband trying to preserve his net worth during a divorce. He was a textbook sociopath operating completely devoid of basic human empathy. He viewed my consulting firm not as my livelihood, but as his personal slush fund. He intended to strip mine my entire life to finance his reckless playboy fantasies. But as I pulled back from the specific details of the yacht purchase and looked at the broader financial architecture displayed across my 3 monitors, a much darker, much more dangerous reality began to set in. The yacht was just a single transaction. It was a drop in the ocean compared to the massive volume of capital flowing through the other 5 Cayman Island shell companies. I ran a comprehensive aggregation script across the entire offshore network. The software calculated the total deposits moving through the Delaware Transit Hub over the past 36 months. The final number flashed on my screen in bright red digits: $12.4 million. My breath caught in my throat. Bradley's luxury commercial real estate firm was successful, but it was absolutely not $12 million in liquid cash successful. You do not generate that kind of untaxed hidden capital simply by closing a few high-rise leases in downtown Boston. That level of hidden wealth requires a systemic, deeply rooted criminal enterprise. I started pulling the corporate tax filings for Bradley's brokerage, cross-referencing his reported income against the massive offshore deposits. The discrepancies were staggering. Bradley was not just defrauding me in a marital dispute. He was actively defrauding his corporate business partners, his real estate investors, and the federal government. He was skimming massive percentages off the top of every major commercial deal his firm executed. He achieved this by generating phantom vendor invoices, inflating property appraisal costs, and routing consulting fees to dummy contracting companies before filtering the money offshore. He had essentially built a massive financial washing machine right under the noses of his partners and the IRS. He was running a sophisticated embezzlement operation, and he was using his naive social climbing mistress as the primary legal shield. Monica's signature was on every single offshore document. If the federal authorities ever breached the Cayman firewall, Bradley had perfectly positioned Monica to take the absolute brunt of the criminal liability. He had engineered a foolproof escape hatch for himself, leaving the mother of his future child holding the bag for multiple federal felonies. The scale of his betrayal was no longer just personal. It was a sprawling multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracy. My father's booming voice echoed in my memory from the phone call earlier that morning. Bradley is structuring a massive new commercial investment fund. We are talking tens of millions of dollars in managed assets. A cold dread washed over me. Bradley was not just hiding money anymore. He was actively soliciting new capital for a brand new fund. He had convinced my father to hand over the family's $2 million retirement account. He was promising my sister Natalie a massive portfolio management commission. He was drawing my entire toxic family directly into the center of a federal financial crime. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the monitors casting long shadows across my office walls. My family had gladly thrown me to the wolves to secure their place in Bradley's new financial empire. They had traded my physical home and my emotional well-being for the promise of unearned wealth. They thought they were backing a financial genius. They had no idea they were enthusiastically boarding a sinking ship captained by a man who would gladly let them drown to save himself. I needed more internal data. I needed to see the exact structure of this new commercial investment fund. I needed to know exactly how much of my family's money Bradley had already stolen. My forensic tools could trace the external flows, but I needed an inside man to breach the internal corporate firewalls. I needed someone who understood network security just as well as I understood forensic accounting. I reached for my encrypted cell phone. I navigated to my secure messaging application and typed out a single precise message. The digital hunt was escalating, and it was time to activate the only ally I had left in the world. I hit send on the secure application and watched the delivery confirmation flash across the screen. The message contained a time, a set of geographic coordinates, and a single word confirming the urgency of the meeting. I powered down my monitors, grabbed my heavily encrypted tablet, and slipped out the back exit of my office building. I needed a location completely severed from the glittering, status-obsessed world my family inhabited. I chose a gritty, unassuming diner situated deep in the industrial district of South Boston, a place where the scent of stale coffee and burnt toast masked any trace of corporate espionage. I arrived 15 minutes early and selected a booth in the far back corner facing the entrance. The vinyl seats were cracked, and the overhead fluorescent light buzzed with a steady, rhythmic hum. I ordered a black coffee and waited, my eyes fixed on the rain-streaked window. Exactly on time, the heavy glass door pushed open. Jamal stepped inside, shaking the damp chill from his dark wool coat. As a senior cybersecurity engineer for a top-tier defense contractor, Jamal possessed a quiet, calculating intelligence that completely eclipsed the shallow vanity of the family he had married into. He scanned the diner with practiced efficiency, his dark eyes categorizing every patron before landing on my booth. He moved with a deliberate, unhurried grace, sliding into the vinyl seat across from me. He did not offer a polite greeting or ask how I was holding up after the brutal ambush in my parents' living room. He knew we were operating far beyond the realm of social pleasantries. "You disabled your personal location tracking software." Jamal noted, his voice a low, resonant baritone that barely carried across the narrow table. "And you used the encrypted channel we established last Thanksgiving when Bradley first started acting erratic. You found something massive." "I found a financial slaughterhouse," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly level. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out my tablet. "Bradley is not bankrupt. He is actively moving millions through a network of Cayman Island shell companies registered under Monica's name. I traced a specific $500,000 transfer that perfectly matches the fake marital debt his lawyer filed this morning. He used that exact money to buy a 55-foot luxury motor yacht in Florida." I expected shock. I expected Jamal to lean back in disbelief at the sheer scale of the betrayal. Instead, he simply picked up his coffee mug, took a slow sip, and set it down precisely on the cardboard coaster. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a sleek titanium encrypted laptop, setting it on the table between us. "I know about the yacht," Jamal said quietly. "He named it the Queen's Escape. He also paid $80,000 in premium slip fees to a private marina in Fort Lauderdale, using a dummy vendor invoice billed as structural concrete repairs for a Boston high-rise." I stared at him, momentarily thrown off balance. My forensic accounting software was incredibly sophisticated, but I had spent the last 12 hours relentlessly hunting those specific transaction identifiers. Jamal was a cybersecurity expert, not an accountant. "How exactly do you know about the marina fees?" I asked, my eyes narrowing. Jamal opened his laptop. The screen illuminated his face in the dim diner. "Because while you were tracing the external money flow through the offshore transit hubs, I was already inside his house, digitally speaking." He turned the screen toward me. Rows of highly classified internal corporate emails, hidden server directories, and private administrative chat logs scrolled across the display. Jamal had not just scraped the public domains. He had completely bypassed Bradley's corporate firewalls and mapped the entire internal nervous system of the commercial real estate brokerage. "It started 3 weeks ago," Jamal explained, his voice steady and clinical. "Natalie came home from a country club luncheon absolutely glowing. She told me that your father, William, had officially transferred the entirety of his $2 million retirement portfolio into a brand new commercial investment fund Bradley was launching. She was practically vibrating with excitement because Bradley promised her a lucrative position as the primary portfolio manager. She demanded that I liquidate my own stock options and transfer our personal savings into Bradley's fund to maximize her impending commission." Jamal paused, his jaw tightening slightly. "Your sister and your parents treat me like a high-paid IT guy. They tolerate my presence because my salary affords Natalie a certain lifestyle, but they have never respected my intellect. They assumed I would just blindly hand over my money because William endorsed the investment. But I do not write checks without reading the source code. You breached his corporate servers, I said, a profound sense of respect washing over me. I ran a silent penetration test on his firm's main server architecture, Jamal confirmed. Bradley's digital security is an absolute joke. He uses basic out-of-the-box encryption protocols that a college freshman could crack. Once I gained administrative access, I started reading the internal communications between Bradley and his offshore fixers. I saw the wire transfers to Monica. I saw the fabricated profit and loss statements he prepared for his divorce lawyer. But Lauren, the offshore embezzlement is just the smokescreen. Jamal tapped a specific command key, bringing up a highly complex organizational chart on the screen. The chart linked Williams' retirement accounts, several high-net-worth local investors, and a maze of empty corporate ledgers. Bradley is not just stealing from his own company to fund his mistress, Jamal said, his dark eyes locking onto mine with absolute gravity. The massive commercial investment fund he is launching does not hold any real property assets. He is taking new investor capital and using it to pay off the dividends of his older failing commercial leases to keep the investors quiet. He is using the incoming cash to cover the massive holes he created when he siphoned those $12 million offshore. The blood drained completely from my face as the horrific reality of the raw data settled deeply into my brain. The underlying math suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense. I looked at the illuminated digital chart tracing the heavy red line from my parents' names directly into the absolute black hole of Bradley's corporate accounts. A Ponzi scheme. I whispered the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. I traced the glowing red line on Jamal's screen, my eyes tracking the devastating trajectory of my family's wealth. He is not just hiding marital assets. He is actively robbing new investors to pay off the old ones. He is running a massive illegal Ponzi scheme right out of his boutique real estate firm. Jamal nodded slowly, his expression grim and resolute. He reached into his coat pocket again and produced a small, matte black USB drive. He slid it across the scratched vinyl table. The small metal device stopped exactly halfway between us. "This contains everything," Jamal stated, his voice a quiet rumble over the diner's ambient noise. "I downloaded the entire internal server architecture. You will find the hidden administrative chat logs, the falsified property appraisals, and the exact routing sequences he used to transfer the incoming capital directly into his offshore accounts. I also pulled the unencrypted emails between Bradley and Monica. They explicitly discuss using the new investment fund to cover up the gaping holes in his commercial leases. You have the external tracking data. I have the internal blueprints. Together, this drive is a fully loaded weapon." I picked up the USB drive. It felt incredibly heavy, a digital bomb capable of leveling everything my family had built over the last 4 decades. I looked back at the screen, my analytical mind isolating the specific transaction timestamp next to my parents' names. "My father's retirement fund," I said, pointing a trembling finger at the data block. "William transferred the $2 million into Bradley's new commercial account last Tuesday." "Yes," Jamal confirmed. "And by Thursday morning, that entire $2 million was completely gone." The sheer velocity of the theft was breathtaking. "Gone where?" I asked, though I already knew the mathematical reality of a collapsing Ponzi scheme. "Every single penny was immediately cannibalized," Jamal explained, pulling up a secondary ledger on his screen. Bradley used $800,000 to pay off 3 aggressive investors who were threatening to audit a failed commercial development in downtown Boston. He wired another $500,000 to the Cayman Islands to cover the exact amount you flagged for Monica's luxury yacht. The remaining $700,000 went straight into his operational accounts to cover massive luxury tax liabilities and to fund the extravagant baby shower your mother is currently planning. I sat back against the booth, my mind reeling. William and Catherine were proudly parading around their country club, bragging to their wealthy friends about Bradley's financial genius. They were actively helping him throw me out onto the street, firmly believing that my destruction was the necessary price for their own guaranteed wealth. They had absolutely no idea that their entire life savings had already been stolen, laundered, and spent on a boat for a 28-year-old mistress. They were completely, irrevocably bankrupt. They sold me out for nothing, I said, a harsh, humorless laugh escaping my throat. They traded my house and my career to secure a commission on a pile of money that had already been incinerated. Natalie pushed them to do it. Jamal added, his dark eyes hardening with a mixture of disgust and cold determination. She wanted that portfolio management title so badly, she willingly overlooked every single red flag. She actually tried to forge my signature on a joint asset transfer document when I refused to hand over my cybersecurity consulting profits. That was the moment I realized I had to dismantle this operation myself. I am not going down with their sinking ship. I am protecting my own hard-earned assets. I looked at Jamal with profound respect. He was the only person in this entire disaster who possessed an ounce of integrity and foresight. My family had treated him like a secondary citizen for years, utterly blind to the fact that he was the only one smart enough to see the trap. If Natalie is officially listed as the primary portfolio manager for this new fund, I reasoned aloud, my forensic training taking over, she is legally implicated in the fraud. When the federal authorities breach the shell companies, they will look at the corporate hierarchy. Bradley is positioning her as a secondary scapegoat, right alongside Monica. Exactly, Jamal confirmed, closing his laptop with a sharp snap. Bradley is building a wall of human shields. Monica takes the fall for the offshore wire fraud, and Natalie takes the fall for soliciting the fraudulent domestic investments. He plans to walk away clean, claiming he was completely unaware of their operational mismanagement. He is a predator. I tightly gripped the black USB drive in my palm. The tactical alliance between us was now fully solidified. We were two highly skilled professionals completely underestimated by a family of arrogant, status-obsessed fools. They thought they controlled the entire board. They did not realize we had just hacked the game entirely. Bradley's lawyer wants me to sign the divorce settlement by Friday, I said, formulating the battle plan in real time. He wants me to officially accept the fabricated $500,000 marital debt and surrender the house before the court can look too closely at his ledgers. William and Catherine are coming to my office tomorrow to personally threaten me into signing. Jamal leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. What is your move, Lauren? You cannot just hand this drive to a local divorce attorney. This is a massive federal crime. If you play this wrong, Bradley will liquidate the remaining hidden assets and vanish before the authorities can freeze his accounts. I am not giving this to a standard attorney, I replied, a dangerous calculating energy flooding my system. I am going to let Bradley walk right into the courthouse. I am going to let him stand in front of the judge in his expensive suit and commit aggressive documented perjury. He is going to officially submit his fake bankruptcy claims into the permanent legal record, and then I am going to hand the judge a single letter. A letter? Jamal asked, his brow furrowing slightly. A comprehensive forensic audit, I clarified. I am going to synthesize your internal server data with my offshore tracing logs. I will map the entire Ponzi scheme, document the wire fraud, and provide the exact routing numbers for the Cayman Island shell companies. I will put it all in one highly condensed, undeniably lethal document. When the judge reads it, he will be legally obligated to immediately refer the case to the FBI and the IRS. Jamal's lips curved into a slow, satisfied smile. It was the smile of a man who knew the enemy was already dead. They just had not stopped breathing yet. You are going to let them celebrate their victory, right up until the exact second the handcuffs click, Jamal said, absolute approval resonating in his voice. They wanted a ruthless divorce, I stated, sliding out of the vinyl booth and slipping the USB drive securely into my pocket. I am going to give them a federal indictment. Let us get to work. The digital evidence we hold is completely bulletproof, and I will not rest until every single one of those criminals is held fully accountable for their actions. I left the diner and drove straight back to my office, locking the heavy deadbolt behind me. The USB drive felt like a physical weight in my pocket, a loaded weapon waiting to be fired. Over the next 3 days, I barely slept. I integrated Jamal's internal server data with my offshore routing logs, building an impenetrable web of financial evidence. I cross-referenced every fake appraisal, every hidden wire transfer, and every encrypted message between my husband and his mistress. The matrix of Bradley's criminal empire was terrifyingly comprehensive, But while I was meticulously assembling his federal indictment, Bradley decided to escalate his petty divorce tactics. On Wednesday morning, I walked across the street to my usual coffee shop. I ordered a black coffee and handed the barista my personal platinum credit card. The machine beeped loudly, flashing a stark red declined message. I frowned, reaching into my wallet and handing her a second card from a completely different bank. The machine declined that one too. I stepped out of the busy line, an icy realization washing over me. I opened my banking application on my phone. Every single one of my personal checking and credit accounts had been frozen. A bright red banner across the screen indicated that a joint account holder had reported fraudulent activity, triggering an automatic security lockdown. Bradley was actively trying to starve me out. He knew I had moved my business capital into a secure corporate account, but he wanted to restrict my day-to-day personal liquidity. He wanted me panicked, unable to buy groceries or pay for gas, desperate enough to beg him for access to my own money. It was a classic heavy-handed abuse tactic designed to force immediate submission. I simply pulled a crisp $50 bill from my emergency cash reserve, paid for my coffee, and walked back to my office. If he thought freezing my personal gym membership and grocery budget would stop me, he was vastly underestimating his opponent. The frozen accounts were merely the opening salvo in his aggressive campaign of intimidation. By Thursday afternoon, the real sabotage began. I was sitting at my desk finalizing the executive summary of the forensic audit when my office line rang. It was the chief financial officer of a major logistics firm, one of my oldest and most lucrative corporate clients. He sounded incredibly uncomfortable, clearing his throat multiple times before finally speaking. He told me that Bradley had reached out to him personally that morning under the guise of professional courtesy. Bradley had spun a wildly fabricated tale about my deteriorating mental health. He claimed that the stress of our separation had caused me to suffer a complete psychological breakdown. He told my client that I was having severe paranoid delusions, that I was manipulating financial ledgers to fit bizarre conspiracy theories, and that I was currently unmedicated and highly unstable. Bradley had strongly advised the executive to temporarily suspend my auditing contracts to protect his company from my supposed erratic behavior. I listened to the executive relay these vicious lies, keeping my breathing perfectly steady. Bradley was actively attempting to destroy my professional reputation. He was calling my high-level corporate clients, utilizing his slick commercial real estate persona to paint me as a hysterical, vindictive woman who was losing her grip on reality. He wanted to isolate me completely, severing both my family ties and my business network in one coordinated strike. I did not defend myself with desperate explanations. I did not raise my voice or act insulted. I simply maintained my calm, authoritative tone. I thanked the executive for his transparency. I calmly explained that my husband and I were going through a highly contested divorce involving complex commercial real estate assets, and that his desperate phone calls were a known documented intimidation tactic used by opposing counsel. I offered to immediately transfer my current auditing projects to an independent third-party reviewer at my own expense to prove the absolute accuracy of my work. The executive relaxed, recognizing my calculated professionalism over the emotional instability Bradley had described. My client assured me my contract was secure and apologized for the intrusion. But the warning shot had been fired. Bradley was desperate to neutralize me before the hearing. He knew a forensic analyst could uncover his hidden offshore assets if given enough time. He needed to discredit me completely so that if I did bring any allegations to the judge, I would be dismissed as a bitter, mentally unstable ex-wife seeking revenge. He was laying the groundwork for my absolute destruction. I ended the call with the executive and immediately updated my encrypted log. I added a new subsection detailing Bradley's attempts at corporate sabotage and tortious interference with my business contracts. Every lie he told my clients was another piece of evidence demonstrating his malicious intent and his desperate need to conceal his financial activities. My phone rang again. This time, it was an automated alert from a luxury event planning company. The notification was an electronic invitation forwarded to my secondary email address, likely by mistake or a glitch in their distribution software. I opened the digital envelope. It was a lavish animated invitation for a baby shower and housewarming party hosted by Monica. The event was scheduled for this upcoming Saturday, exactly 48 hours before our mandated court appearance. The venue listed was my exact home address in Beacon Hill. The guest list included my parents, my sister Natalie, his investors, and high society figures. They were throwing a massive catered celebration right in the middle of a contested divorce, openly flaunting their new life together. I stared at the glowing screen, an icy resolve hardening my features. They wanted to play arrogant games with my reputation. They wanted to steal my home and parade it in front of the world. They were about to learn a very painful lesson about the severe consequences of arrogant complacency. Saturday afternoon arrived with clear skies and unseasonably warm weather, providing the absolute perfect backdrop for the spectacle unfolding at my Beacon Hill property. I remained seated in my secure office downtown, entirely focused on my secondary monitor. I had set up an automated script to pull every public and private social media post tagged with my home address or the custom hashtag Monica had created for the event. The feed refreshed every 30 seconds, delivering a steady high-definition stream of my own replacement. Monica had spared absolutely no expense. The digital photographs revealed towering installations of imported blue hydrangeas framing the mahogany front door. A string quartet played on the back terrace, and white-gloved waitstaff circulated with silver trays of champagne and caviar. The caterers had set up a massive ice sculpture carved into the shape of a baby block right in the center of the garden I had personally landscaped 2 years ago. Watching the extravagant display of wealth did not trigger a single tear. I just kept my eyes fixed on the monetary value of every floral arrangement and catering tray. They were burning through thousands of dollars of stolen investor capital, publicly flaunting the exact cash Bradley claimed he did not possess in his sworn legal filings. The most damning evidence, however, was not the expensive catering, it was the guest list. At precisely 2 o'clock, the algorithm captured a live video stream uploaded by my sister. Natalie strutted up my front walkway, wearing a designer cocktail dress, holding a massive gift box wrapped in silver paper. My parents, William and Catherine, followed closely behind her, beaming with unabashed pride. Catherine immediately rushed toward Monica, pulling the mistress into a tight, highly exaggerated embrace for the cameras. My mother placed a gentle hand on Monica's baby bump, her face glowing with a level of maternal affection she had never once directed toward me. William firmly shook Bradley's hand, patting him on the shoulder like a victorious general welcoming home his bravest soldier. They posed for dozens of professional photographs together under the floral archway, acting as if I had simply never existed in their lives. I watched a video clip of Catherine addressing a group of high society guests on my patio. She was practically vibrating with excitement. "We are just so incredibly blessed to welcome Monica into our inner circle," Catherine announced, raising her crystal flute to the crowd. "She brings such wonderful, vibrant energy to this family. Bradley has finally found his true match, and we cannot wait to spoil our new grandson. And we are finally complete." My family smoothly and efficiently erased my 34 years of existence from the family narrative in a single afternoon. They completely replaced me with a younger, more compliant accessory who validated their superficial lifestyle. Natalie posted a curated photo carousel featuring her and Monica laughing in my custom kitchen. The caption read, "Sisters by choice, family by fate," celebrating the newest addition to our perfect circle. While my parents and sister performed for the cameras, Jamal remained a silent, observant shadow in the background of their brightly filtered photographs. He did not pose, he did not toast, but he was actively working. Every 15 minutes, my encrypted messaging application pinged with a secure text from his phone. Jamal was sending me real-time audio snippets and photographs of the physical guest list, providing critical intelligence straight from the front lines of the enemy camp. William just cornered 2 commercial investors by the ice sculpture Jamal typed in a quick encrypted message. He is aggressively pitching Bradley's new fund, telling them he personally transferred his entire retirement portfolio to secure a founding position. He is literally recruiting new victims for the Ponzi scheme as we speak. A few minutes later, another message arrived from Jamal, this one containing a brief audio recording captured near the open bar. I pressed play and heard Natalie's sharp, distinctive voice cutting over the background music. Lauren is completely finished. My sister bragged to a group of country club wives. She is refusing to sign the divorce settlement out of pure spite, but Dad and Bradley are going to deal with her tomorrow. Once the judge forces her to liquidate her boring little accounting firm, she will have to move out of the city entirely. Bradley promised me the portfolio management contract by next Friday, so I am just focusing on my new executive wardrobe. I archived the audio file into the main federal evidence folder. They were colluding. Natalie was openly admitting to anticipating a financial kickback contingent on my forced bankruptcy, while William was aiding a federal wire fraud operation. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the mosaic of smiling, treacherous faces filling my monitors. They thought this lavish party was their ultimate victory lap. They believed they had successfully isolated and discarded me without a single consequence. But they were merely documenting their own criminal conspiracy in high definition. Every single photograph uploaded to the internet securely locked another pair of handcuffs around their wrists. The celebration would continue into the evening, but I shut off my monitors. I had collected enough digital rope to hang them all. I packed my briefcase and prepared to leave the office. The extravagant party was merely the prelude to the main event. The real confrontation was scheduled for the next morning, when Bradley and my parents planned to deliver their final threat before we faced the judge. They thought they could break me with intimidation, but they were walking blindly into a meticulously designed trap. I turned off the lights and walked out into the cool evening air. I unlocked my car and tossed my briefcase onto the passenger seat, feeling the immense weight of the collected evidence settling firmly into place. I drove home, my mind already running through the precise legal choreography required for tomorrow. They wanted a showdown, and I was going to give them exactly the cold reception they deserved. Sunday evening enveloped the city in a dense gray fog as I sat alone in my downtown office finalizing the physical copies of my forensic audit. The digital files were already securely transmitted to my legal counsel, but holding the heavy bound folders in my hands provided a deeply satisfying tactile confirmation of my impending victory. I was methodically aligning the edges of the thick paper stacks when the heavy glass doors of my reception area suddenly rattled. I glanced at the security monitor on my desk. Bradley was standing outside swiping his old building access card. My father William and my mother Catherine stood right behind him. I had purposefully left his access active for this exact scenario. I wanted them to walk right into my territory thinking they possessed the upper hand. I pressed the remote unlock button under my desk and waited. Heavy footsteps echoed down the polished hallway. Bradley marched into my office first, wearing a casual cashmere sweater that screamed careless arrogance. William and Catherine followed closely, maintaining their country club posture as they surveyed my workspace with blatant disdain. My father crossed his arms, staring down at me with the absolute authority he believed he still commanded. "We are done playing these childish games, Lauren," William barked, breaking the silence. "Your mother and I left a very important charity dinner to be here tonight. Bradley's lawyer sent the final settlement offer to your inbox 3 hours ago. You have ignored it. We are here to make sure you sign the physical copy right now, so we can all move on with our lives." Bradley stepped forward, tossing a familiar thick manila envelope onto my desk. It landed right next to the sealed federal evidence folders he had absolutely no idea existed. "Sign the paper, Lauren," Bradley demanded with a patronizing sigh. "You are embarrassing yourself at this point. I froze your personal credit cards to give you a reality check. You cannot afford a protracted legal battle against my resources. Just accept the marital debt division and surrender the house. If you do this quietly tonight, I will personally convince my attorney not to seek legal fees from your pathetic little consulting firm." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, resting my hands calmly in my lap. I did not reach for the envelope. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked at the three people standing in my office, recognizing them entirely as hostile entities. I am not signing anything, Bradley, I stated evenly, and I am certainly not liquidating my professional assets to pay off a fabricated $500,000 corporate loan so you can buy Monica more diamond rings. The court will see us tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Catherine stepped forward, slamming her designer handbag onto my desk, her face flushed with intense anger. You are completely delusional, Lauren. Do you truly think any judge is going to believe a bitter, discarded wife over a successful commercial real estate broker and her own parents, Bradley, is launching a massive investment fund? He is bringing immense wealth to this family. Natalie is getting a portfolio management position that will secure her future. We will not allow your selfish jealousy to destroy this incredible financial opportunity. My jealousy. I repeated, a cold smirk briefly touching my lips. You are standing in my office demanding I bankrupt myself to fund your retirement kickbacks. You are actively aiding a man who just moved his pregnant mistress into my home. You traded your daughter for a promised commission. William slammed his fist violently onto the surface of my desk, rattling my dual monitors. His eyes burned with a dark, manipulative fury. He leaned over me, attempting to use his physical size to force my submission. You listen to me very carefully, William threatened, his voice dropping to a menacing, gravelly pitch. If you refuse to sign that debt acceptance tonight and insist on dragging us into court tomorrow morning, I will personally destroy you. I will stand before that judge under oath and I will testify that you are completely mentally unstable. I will swear on the stand that you emotionally abused Bradley for years. I will tell the court that you are suffering from severe paranoid delusions and that you routinely manipulate financial documents to fit your own sick narratives. Your mother will corroborate every single word. We will permanently ruin your professional reputation. No corporate client will ever hire you again once your own parents testify to your insanity. The air in the room grew heavy. My own father was delivering the ultimate threat. He was openly promising to commit aggressive, calculated perjury in a federal courtroom just to protect a man who was actively robbing him blind. He was willing to utterly destroy my life, my sanity, and my career, simply to ensure he got his slice of Bradley's non-existent investment fund. I looked at William. I looked at Catherine, who stood firmly beside him, nodding in fierce agreement with his horrific threat. I looked at Bradley, who was grinning with pure, unadulterated triumph, believing he had brilliantly engineered my absolute checkmate. I reached forward and closed my laptop with a soft, definitive click. I picked up the sealed evidence folders, tucking them securely under my arm. I stood up slowly from my chair, matching my father's gaze with an icy, impenetrable stare. Dad, I said, my voice chillingly calm, completely devoid of any fear or hesitation. Tomorrow morning, you will deeply regret making that promise. I highly suggest you bring a very good defense attorney to the courthouse. You are going to need one. I walked directly past all of them, feeling the intense weight of their confused and angry stares burning deeply into my back as I crossed the room. I did not look back even once as I exited the office, leaving them entirely alone inside the glass walls with their false confidence and their impending, unavoidable doom. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B swung open with a resounding thud. Monday morning arrived with a sharp chill that perfectly matched the atmosphere inside the room. I walked down the center aisle, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor. I wore a tailored charcoal suit, presenting the exact image of the boring, meticulous accountant my family so deeply despised. My attorney, Rebecca, walked beside me. She carried her own standard briefcase, but I personally held the single-sealed manila envelope containing the comprehensive forensic audit. We took our seats at the respondents' table, arranging our minimal paperwork. The courtroom was an imposing theater of mahogany and stained glass, designed to make ordinary people feel small and intimidated. Today, however, it was simply my operational arena. 10 minutes later, the double doors flew open again, admitting a tidal wave of sheer, unchecked arrogance. Bradley strode into the courtroom like a conquering emperor. He wore a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit that clung perfectly to his frame, a silk tie expertly knotted at his throat, and a massive gold Rolex gleaming conspicuously on his wrist. He did not look like a man on the brink of catastrophic commercial bankruptcy. He looked like a man who had just closed the most lucrative real estate deal of his entire career. He loudly joked with his high-priced defense attorney, a silver-haired shark who made a living bullying desperate spouses into absolute submission. Bradley clapped his lawyer on the back, flashing a perfectly whitened smile that illuminated his sheer confidence. He did not bother looking in my direction as he took his seat at the petitioner's table. He unbuttoned his suit jacket with a theatrical flourish and leaned back in his chair, exuding an aura of sickening invincibility. He was convinced he held every winning card in his hand. The public gallery right behind him quickly filled with his enthusiastic supporting cast. Monica walked in first wearing a demure pastel pink maternity dress, clearly chosen to evoke maximum sympathy from the judge. She rested her hands protectively over her baby bump, playing the innocent, devoted new mother to absolute perfection. She settled into the front row, crossing her legs and lifting her chin with a smug sense of ownership. My parents, William and Catherine, flanked her on either side like fiercely loyal royal guards. William wore his finest country club blazer, his chest puffed out with self-righteous authority. He was fully prepared to take the witness stand and commit aggressive perjury to secure his imagined financial future. He glared at the back of my head, silently communicating the threat he made in my office the night before. Catherine adjusted her diamond necklace, leaning over to whisper conspiratorially into Monica's ear. They shared a soft, mocking laugh, putting their complete lack of basic human decency on public display. My sister Natalie sat directly behind Bradley, practically vibrating with greedy excitement. She was dressed in a flashy, oversized designer outfit, heavily accessorized with gold jewelry, already acting exactly like the wealthy corporate portfolio manager she truly believed she was about to become. She checked her reflection in her phone screen, utterly oblivious to the massive criminal conspiracy she was eagerly attaching her name to. They whispered among themselves, casting sneering, triumphant looks in my direction whenever they thought my attorney was not looking. They formed a unified, impenetrable front of betrayal, completely confident that my total financial and emotional destruction was only minutes away. They thought they were attending a coronation. They had no idea they were sitting in the front row of their own execution. Far removed from their toxic little circle, seated entirely alone in the very last row of the gallery, was Jamal. He wore a simple dark wool sweater blending seamlessly into the deep shadows of the heavy wood paneling. He did not speak to my parents. He did not acknowledge his wife Natalie, who was too busy fawning over Bradley to notice her own husband's presence. Jamal sat perfectly still, his posture relaxed, but his dark eyes sharply focused on the petitioner's table. He was the invisible architect of their impending doom, a silent guardian of the brutal, undeniable truth. As I settled into my chair and smoothed the front of my jacket, I turned my head slightly, catching his eye across the crowded, noisy room. For a brief, suspended second, the chaotic murmurs of my family completely faded into background noise. Jamal gave me a single slow nod of absolute solidarity. It was a silent confirmation that the digital trap we spent the entire weekend building was locked, loaded, and completely inescapable. The offshore wire logs, the internal server data, the fraudulent corporate emails, everything was perfectly synthesized and waiting inside the envelope resting under my hands. I held his gaze for a heartbeat longer, offering a nearly invisible nod in return. We were entirely ready. Bradley suddenly leaned across the aisle, dividing our tables. His expensive cologne wafted through the air, aggressive and overpowering. He smirked at me, his eyes dancing with malicious delight. "You should have signed the papers last night, Lauren." Bradley whispered, his tone dripping with condescending pity. "I'm going to take your business, your house, and every last shred of your dignity today. You brought this entirely on yourself." I did not flinch. I did not glare. I simply turned my attention back to the front of the room, placing the sealed manila envelope exactly in the dead center of my desk. I folded my hands neatly over the thick paper, feeling the sharp, crisp edges beneath my fingertips. I did not need to engage in petty verbal sparring. The numbers inside that envelope were about to speak loud enough to shatter his entire world. The heavy wooden door beside the bench suddenly clicked open, signaling the arrival of Judge Harrison. The low chatter in the gallery immediately died down. The bailiff stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tense, heavy silence of the courtroom to announce the beginning of the proceedings. "All rise," the bailiff called out, his voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings of the courtroom. Judge Harrison stepped up to the bench, his black robe sweeping behind him. He was a formidable presence, known throughout the Boston legal community for his absolute intolerance of courtroom theatrics and frivolous litigation. He sat down, adjusted his heavy framed glasses, and opened the thick case file resting on his desk. He glanced briefly at both tables before giving a short, authoritative nod. "You may be seated," Judge Harrison stated, his voice a low rumble. "We are here today for the preliminary hearing in the divorce proceedings of Bradley and Lauren. Counsel for the petitioner, you may proceed with your opening statements regarding the division of marital assets and liabilities." Bradley's attorney, a sleek, sharp-featured man named Pierce, immediately stood up. He adjusted the lapels of his expensive tailored suit with a practiced, dramatic flair. He walked slowly out from behind the petitioner's table, carrying a thick binder of heavily manipulated financial disclosures. He positioned himself perfectly in the center of the floor, demanding the absolute attention of everyone in the room. "Your Honor," Pierce began, his voice dripping with manufactured sympathy, "we are standing here today to resolve a deeply unfortunate situation. My client Bradley is a hard-working, dedicated commercial real estate broker. He has spent the entirety of this 7-year marriage working grueling hours to provide a luxurious lifestyle for his wife. He purchased their beautiful Beacon Hill estate, he paid the property taxes, and he generated the vast majority of their marital wealth. But as this court is well aware, the commercial real estate market has recently suffered a catastrophic downturn." Pierce paused, letting the silence hang in the air for maximum theatrical effect. He opened his binder and pulled out a stack of papers, waving them slightly. "My client's brokerage has experienced a devastating liquidity crisis." Pierce continued, his tone turning grave and urgent. "Over the past 12 months, Bradley has lost multiple high-value commercial leases. His operational overhead has completely consumed his cash reserves. 6 months ago, in a desperate attempt to save his business and protect the financial stability of his marriage, my client was forced to take out an emergency commercial loan of $500,000. I sat perfectly still, my face entirely blank." Pierce was flawlessly delivering the exact script Bradley had paid him to perform. He was laying out the fabricated narrative with absolute conviction, officially submitting these egregious lies straight into the permanent legal record. "This loan was a shared marital burden acquired to maintain their joint lifestyle," Pierce argued, turning slightly to point an accusing finger directly at me. "Yet his wife Lauren has offered absolutely zero financial support. She runs a highly lucrative independent forensic consulting firm. She possesses significant liquid capital. Instead of acting as a supportive partner during this economic crisis, she has hoarded her wealth and refused to assist her drowning husband. Therefore, Your Honor, we are formally petitioning this court to order the immediate liquidation of her business assets to cover $250,000 of this shared marital debt." A quiet gasp echoed from the gallery. My mother, Catherine, was literally clutching her pearls, putting on a spectacular show of shock and dismay for the benefit of the judge. My father, William, nodded solemnly, fully endorsing the utter destruction of my career. Pierce was not finished. He stepped closer to the judge's bench, lowering his voice into a tone of quiet, urgent necessity. "Furthermore, Your Honor, my client is currently expecting a child with his new partner. They are desperately trying to build a stable home amidst this financial ruin. Given that Lauren is an independent professional who can easily secure a small apartment downtown, we demand that she surrender her complete equity interest in the Beacon Hill property. It is the only equitable solution that allows this growing family a chance to survive this devastating economic hardship." Pierce offered a respectful bow to the judge and confidently returned to his seat. The performance was a masterclass in legal manipulation. He had painted Bradley as a tragic hero victimized by the economy, and me as a selfish, wealthy villain who refused to pay her fair share. Bradley leaned back in his heavy wooden chair. He turned his head slightly toward me, ensuring his lawyer blocked the judge's line of sight. His face was twisted into a malicious, deeply satisfied sneer. "You are completely finished, Lauren," Bradley whispered across the narrow aisle, his voice a quiet, venomous hiss. "You will never touch my money again. I am going to bleed your little business dry, and then I'm going to throw you out on the street. You should have just signed the papers." From the front row of the gallery, located just inches behind Bradley's chair, Monica leaned forward. She rested her hands prominently on her baby bump and let out a soft, mocking laugh. "She does not deserve a single dime," Monica whispered loudly enough for me to hear perfectly. "She is just a bitter, dried-up accountant. Make sure you take her car too, babe. I need something practical for running errands." Behind her, my sister Natalie let out a quiet snicker of agreement. My entire biological family was sitting there actively cheering for my absolute financial and personal ruin. They were practically vibrating with joyous anticipation, eager to watch the judge drop the gavel and strip away everything I had worked my entire adult life to build. I did not react. I did not glare at Bradley or shoot venomous looks at Monica. I did not turn around to acknowledge my treacherous parents or my vicious sister. I simply sat there, breathing evenly, projecting the absolute calm of a deep frozen lake. My attorney Rebecca shifted slightly in her seat beside me, ready to stand and deliver our rebuttal. But I placed a firm, steady hand over her wrist silently, instructing her to remain seated for just a moment longer. I needed Bradley to feel the absolute peak of his own arrogance. I needed him to bathe in the false glory of his perceived victory. I needed his fabricated financial statements and his blatant aggressive perjury to settle firmly and officially into the court transcripts. Every single lie his attorney had just spoken was another layer of concrete poured over the entrance to his own tomb. I looked down at the sealed manila envelope resting quietly under my folded hands. Inside those crisp paper walls was the complete forensic map of his $12 million offshore embezzlement empire. Inside was the irrefutable proof of his Cayman Island shell companies, his luxury yacht purchase, and the devastating Ponzi scheme that had just swallowed my parents' entire retirement fund. Bradley thought he was playing a game of intimidation and fake debts. He had absolutely no idea that I had brought a nuclear weapon to a knife fight. Judge Harrison finished taking his notes. He set his pen down and looked up, his stern gaze shifting directly from Bradley's table over to mine. The courtroom grew incredibly silent, the tension snapping tight across the large room. "Does the respondent have anything to present before I address these petitions?" Judge Harrison asked, his voice echoing with heavy judicial authority. I finally moved. I picked up the sealed envelope and stood up. The silence was absolute. I did not walk toward the bench with a trembling hand or a tearful plea. I handed the thick manila envelope to Rebecca. She stood perfectly mirroring my absolute composure and carried the heavy package across the well of the courtroom. She handed it directly to the bailiff. The bailiff, a tall man with a stern expression, carried the envelope up the wooden steps and placed it directly in the center of Judge Harrison's immaculate desk. Bradley let out a sharp, dismissive scoff from the petitioner's table. He leaned toward his high-priced attorney, Pierce, muttering something about desperate delay tactics. In the gallery right behind them, my mother shifted in her seat, undoubtedly annoyed that I was prolonging what she considered a mere formality. They all assumed I had submitted a pathetic emotional letter begging for the house or pleading for leniency regarding the fabricated debt. They believed I was fighting a losing battle with sentimentality because they severely underestimated my professional capabilities. "Your Honor," Rebecca stated, her voice projecting clearly across the vast room, "we are not submitting a traditional financial affidavit or a plea for mediation. What you have before you is a comprehensive forensic financial audit conducted by my client. This document was synthesized using legally obtained cross-border asset discovery protocols, public vessel registration databases, and internal corporate server architecture." Pierce stood up immediately, buttoning his suit jacket with a frantic, aggressive motion. "Objection, Your Honor. This is highly irregular. Opposing counsel cannot simply dump unverified documents into the record at a preliminary hearing without prior discovery. My client has already provided complete and accurate financial disclosures under penalty of perjury." Judge Harrison held up a single authoritative hand, Pierce instantly snapped his mouth shut and slowly sat back down. The judge reached for the metal letter opener resting near his gavel. He sliced through the heavy wax seal I had meticulously applied to the envelope the night before. He pulled out the thick stack of bound paper. The top page was a crisp, perfectly formatted executive summary detailing the precise flow of $12.4 million of stolen capital. I sat perfectly still, watching the judge adjust his heavy-framed glasses. He looked down at the first page. For the first 30 seconds, the courtroom was so profoundly quiet that the rhythmic ticking of the antique clock on the back wall sounded like hammer strikes. Judge Harrison's expression initially registered standard judicial boredom, the look of a man who dealt with petty marital disputes every single day. But as his eyes scanned the first paragraph detailing the Delaware Transit Hub and the specific fractional transactions designed to evade federal banking triggers, his posture changed. He sat up straighter. He leaned closer to the document. He turned to the second page. His eyes began darting rapidly back and forth across the meticulously organized spreadsheets. He flipped to the third page, which contained the direct correlation between Bradley's fabricated $500,000 marital debt and the exact offshore wire transfer landing in Monica's Cayman Island holding account. He examined the highlighted registry documents for the luxury motor yacht, the Queen's Escape. He studied the signature lines bearing Monica's legal name. The silence in the room stretched from tense to agonizing. Bradley shifted his weight in his heavy wooden chair. The smug, victorious grin was slowly melting off his face, replaced by a tight, rigid mask of confusion. He glanced at Pierce, but the silver-haired lawyer looked equally perplexed, his brow furrowed in deep concern as he watched the judge devour the documents. In the gallery, the arrogant whispers of my family had completely ceased. My father leaned forward, resting his elbows on the wooden partition, trying desperately to decipher the shifting atmosphere. Monica had stopped rubbing her baby bump. Her hands were now gripping the edge of her purse, her knuckles turning white. They could all feel the atmospheric pressure dropping rapidly, the distinct sensation of all the oxygen being sucked out of the room just before a massive explosion. Judge Harrison turned another page, revealing the internal server logs Jamal had extracted. He read the decrypted emails between Bradley and his offshore fixers. He traced the complex diagram showing the incoming investor capital being immediately cannibalized to cover older commercial lease failures. He saw the exact routing sequences that proved the $2 million retirement fund belonging to my parents had already been completely incinerated to fund Bradley's lavish lifestyle and luxury tax liabilities. Judge Harrison lowered the document to his desk. He took off his heavy framed glasses and set them down next to his gavel. He looked completely astounded. Then a sound completely alien to the strict formal environment of courtroom 4B shattered the agonizing silence. Judge Harrison laughed. It was not a small chuckle. It was a loud, booming, echoing laugh of pure, unadulterated disbelief and professional appreciation. The sound bounced off the mahogany walls and stained glass windows, striking Bradley like a physical blow. The color drained completely from my husband's face, leaving him a sickening shade of pale gray. Pierce practically jumped out of his chair, his eyes wide with genuine panic. "Oh, this is good," Judge Harrison said quietly, a sharp smile playing on his lips as he looked directly at Bradley. "This is incredibly good." The sheer terror that washed over the petitioner's table was intoxicating. Bradley's hands began to visibly shake. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing against his silk tie. He finally realized that the boring accountant he had mocked, belittled, and attempted to destroy had not just uncovered his hidden savings. She had completely dismantled his entire criminal empire. "Your Honor." Pierce stammered, his polished, arrogant demeanor entirely shattered. "I must respectfully request a brief recess to review whatever opposing counsel has just submitted to the bench. We have not been given the opportunity to verify these claims." Judge Harrison picked up his glasses and slid them back onto his face. The brief moment of amusement vanished, replaced by an icy, terrifying judicial fury. He stared down at Bradley and Pierce with absolute contempt. Counselor Judge Harrison stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "You do not need a recess to review this. You need a highly experienced criminal defense attorney. And your client needs to remain exactly where he is sitting, because based on the forensic evidence currently resting on my desk, the man sitting next to you has just committed aggressive documented perjury in my courtroom, in addition to a staggering list of federal financial crimes. In the gallery, Monica let out a sharp, panicked gasp. My father froze entirely, his mouth falling slightly open as the catastrophic reality of the judge's words slammed into him. The impenetrable fortress of lies they had built together was collapsing right on top of their heads. The trap had officially snapped shut. Judge Harrison picked up the forensic audit and turned his blistering gaze toward Pierce. "Counselor, your client came into my courtroom demanding the respondent liquidate her business to pay a fabricated commercial loan," Judge Harrison stated, his voice ringing like a death knell. "He also demanded sole possession of the Beacon Hill property. Let us address the property first. According to these verified trust documents, Bradley does not own a single square inch of that estate. The deed is held by a blind, irrevocable trust established by Lauren well before this marriage began. Your client has been illegally moving his mistress into a property he has absolutely no legal right to occupy." Bradley gripped the edge of his table, his knuckles turning white. Pierce opened his mouth to object, but the judge slammed his hand flat against the paperwork. "I am not finished," Judge Harrison thundered. "Your client submitted sworn financial affidavits claiming near bankruptcy. Yet this audit meticulously traces $12.4 million, routed directly from his supposedly failing commercial real estate firm through a Delaware transit hub landing squarely in 6 different Cayman Island shell companies." The judge flipped a page, his eyes locking onto the gallery. Monica shrank back into the wooden bench, her hands trembling uncontrollably over her pastel maternity dress. "Every single one of those offshore accounts is registered under the legal name of Monica," Judge Harrison declared loudly, "including the specific holding account used to purchase a 55-foot luxury motor yacht named the Queen's Escape, bought with the exact $500,000 your client claimed was an emergency business loan." A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Natalie dropped her phone. It clattered loudly against the floorboards, but she did not even reach down to retrieve it. "But the offshore tax evasion and marital fraud are remarkably the least of your client's problems today." Judge Harrison continued delivering the final fatal blow. "This audit cross-references internal server logs with recent capital injections. Your client is not just hiding money, he is operating a massive multi-tiered Ponzi scheme. He has been taking millions in new investor capital to cover the gaping deficits in his older commercial portfolios." William let out a choked, devastated sound from the gallery. He finally realized his $2 million retirement fund was entirely gone, incinerated, to pay off Bradley's previous victims and fund Monica's extravagant lifestyle. Catherine covered her face with her hands, shaking violently. "I have zero jurisdiction over federal financial crimes," Judge Harrison said, reaching for his desk phone. "But I have a strict legal obligation as an officer of the court. I am immediately denying all petitions from the plaintiff." He pressed a button on his console, looking directly at the bailiff. "Lock the courtroom doors. Nobody leaves. Contact the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service immediately. We have a major wire fraud and embezzlement case, and the primary suspect is sitting right in front of me." 2 federal agents in dark windbreakers strode through the heavy doors minutes later. They marched directly to the petitioner's table and hauled Bradley to his feet. The custom suit wrinkled as they wrenched his arms behind his back, locking steel cuffs around his wrists. He looked like a terrified, broken child. The bailiff herded us down the grand marble staircase to the front entrance. The cold morning air whipped across the stone steps as the agents shoved Bradley into an unmarked black vehicle. Monica stood on the sidewalk, trembling hysterically as she watched her billionaire fantasy drive away to federal prison. She clutched her designer bag, finally realizing it was the only valuable asset she had left. I stood near the bottom of the steps, buttoning my charcoal jacket. I watched William and Catherine slowly descend the staircase. They looked entirely hollowed out. Their polished country club facade had completely shattered. They stumbled toward me with desperate wide eyes, finally comprehending the absolute permanence of their financial ruin. Every dollar of their $2 million retirement fund was gone forever. "Lauren," William pleaded, his voice cracking with raw panic. "Lauren, you have to help us. We have absolutely nothing left. The bank will foreclose on the house. We cannot afford legal representation." Catherine reached out with a shaking hand, desperately trying to grasp my arm. "Please, sweetheart. We are your family. You are a wealthy woman. You can hire lawyers to recover our money. You have to save us." I stepped back easily, avoiding her touch. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I adjusted the volume to maximum and hit play on the audio file I recorded in my office the night before. William's angry, gravelly voice echoed across the courthouse steps. "If you refuse to sign that debt acceptance tonight, I will personally destroy you. I will testify that you are completely mentally unstable." Then, Catherine's shrill voice joined in. "You are going to take the hit for the greater good of this family. Sign the papers, liquidate your firm, and pay the man." I stopped the recording and slipped the phone back into my pocket. I looked at my parents with freezing indifference. "I am just a boring accountant," I stated calmly, "and accountants do not finance the retirements of hostile liabilities. You traded your daughter for a commission check that bounced? Enjoy the consequences." I turned away as Natalie rushed down the steps crying about her ruined career. She grabbed Jamal's arm, demanding he fix this disaster. Jamal firmly removed her hand from his sleeve. "I already fixed my end," Jamal said, his deep voice carrying absolute finality. "I transferred all my personal assets into a secure trust yesterday. I am serving you with divorce papers this afternoon, Natalie. I refuse to sync with your family." He walked past her, giving me a respectful nod before heading down the street. My family stood paralyzed on the cold concrete, entirely bankrupt and completely alone. My family stood paralyzed on the cold concrete, entirely bankrupt and completely alone. I turned my back on them, stepped into my waiting car, and instructed my driver to take me back to my office. I had a business to run. The fallout over the next 6 months was absolutely spectacular. The federal authorities did not offer Bradley any lenient plea deals. The forensic audit I provided was so meticulously documented and legally ironclad that the prosecutors barely had to lift a finger to secure a conviction. Bradley was officially charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, tax evasion, and operating a massive financial scheme across international borders. The judge handed down a definitive 15-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. There would be no early parole for good behavior. The man who had worn custom Tom Ford suits and bragged about his massive commercial real estate returns was now wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit stripped of every single asset he had ever stolen. His arrogant smirk was permanently erased. Monica fared no better. The Internal Revenue Service immediately seized the Cayman Island shell companies registered in her name. Federal agents confiscated the luxury motor yacht before it even left the marina in Fort Lauderdale. Because her signature was on every single fraudulent offshore document, she was held personally liable for a staggering amount of unpaid luxury taxes and corporate penalties. She was forced to declare complete bankruptcy. The designer bags she had flaunted on social media were auctioned off by federal liquidators to pay her mounting legal fees. She was evicted from the expensive downtown apartment she had rented with Bradley's stolen funds. She ended up moving into a tiny, cramped studio on the far outskirts of the city, raising her child entirely alone without a single dime of the massive inheritance she had arrogantly bragged about. The glamorous life she thought she had stolen from me vanished like smoke in the wind. As for my biological family, the destruction of their social and financial standing was absolute. The country club elite, the people my mother and father had spent their entire lives desperately trying to impress, dropped them the very instant the scandal hit the local news. Nobody wanted to be associated with individuals tied to a federal fraud investigation. Without their $2 million retirement fund, William and Catherine could no longer afford the mortgage on their sprawling suburban estate. The bank foreclosed on the property within 4 months. The house where I had endured decades of emotional neglect and relentless criticism was sold at a public auction. My parents were forced to pack whatever belongings they could fit into a rented moving truck. They relocated to a run-down, poorly maintained apartment complex located miles away from their former affluent neighborhood. The luxury vehicles were repossessed. The lavish charity galas were permanently canceled. Catherine had to take a job working as a cashier at a local retail store just to help cover their basic utility bills. William, the man who had constantly measured human worth by financial dominance, spent his days sitting in a tiny living room, completely stripped of his power and his pride. They had gambled their entire future on a fraudulent illusion, and the house always wins in the end. My sister Natalie experienced the harshest reality check of all. Jamal executed his divorce proceedings with the exact same quiet, calculating precision he used in his cybersecurity career. Because he had kept his finances entirely separate and filed the paperwork before the federal investigation formally implicated Natalie in the fraudulent investment fund, he walked away with his assets completely intact. Natalie was left with nothing but her useless, flashy wardrobe. Stripped of Jamal's financial support and our parents' safety net, the former golden child had to swallow her massive ego and accept a minimum wage administrative position just to afford rent. She finally had to work a boring, tedious job, the exact type of career she had mocked me for having my entire life. While they navigated their self-inflicted ruin, I focused entirely on my future. I officially rebranded my forensic financial consulting firm, removing any lingering ties to the past. The highly publicized downfall of Bradley's operation served as the ultimate advertisement for my professional capabilities. Corporate executives across the East Coast saw exactly what happened to the man who tried to cross me. My client roster tripled within a year. I expanded my office space, hired 5 new junior analysts, and increased my consulting rates by 40%. I was no longer just a boring accountant. I was widely recognized as the most formidable financial investigator in the city. I kept the beautiful Victorian home in Beacon Hill. I hired a specialized crew to completely remodel the kitchen, stripping away the imported Italian marble and installing dark slate and natural wood. I erased every single physical trace of Bradley and Monica from the property. The house was no longer a shared marital asset or a battleground. It was my personal fortress, completely paid off and legally secured in my anonymous trust. On a warm Friday evening, exactly 1 year after the courtroom confrontation, I stepped out onto my second-floor balcony. I wore comfortable silk loungewear, feeling the gentle breeze coming off the harbor. I poured myself a glass of expensive red wine, swirling the dark liquid in the crystal glass. The city lights sparkled brightly against the dark sky, a sprawling landscape of endless possibilities. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the wine, savoring the rich, complex flavor. The heavy, suffocating weight of my toxic family was completely gone. The constant need to seek approval from people who fundamentally despised me had been entirely eradicated. I was 35 years old, completely independent, incredibly wealthy, and finally at peace. Family is not defined by the people who share your bloodline. Family is defined by the people who stand firmly beside you when the world turns hostile. True family never treats your loyalty as a disposable commodity. They never throw you to the wolves to secure their own comfort. Sometimes the most profitable investment you will ever make in your entire life is cutting your losses, destroying the toxic connections holding you back, and betting absolutely everything on yourself. Have you ever had to stand up and fiercely protect your own peace against the people who are supposed to love you the most? Please share your own story with us in the comments section below. The chilling story of Lauren's betrayal by her husband, parents, and sister serves as a profound reminder of a difficult but necessary truth. Your self-worth should never be determined by the validation of toxic family members. Society often conditions us to believe that blood ties are sacred and unbreakable, demanding our unconditional loyalty, no matter the cost. However, Lauren's ordeal beautifully demonstrates that when a family views your loyalty as a disposable commodity and your pain as a mere inconvenience, severing those ties is not an act of betrayal, it is the ultimate act of self-preservation. Throughout her entire life, Lauren was treated as a defective asset simply because she did not fit into her family's superficial status-obsessed mold. When she faced the absolute worst moment of her life, her husband flaunting his pregnant mistress, and attempting to bankrupt her, her parents and sister eagerly joined the execution squad for their own financial gain. If Lauren had internalized their horrific perception of her, she would have easily crumbled under the weight of their manipulation. Instead, she leaned heavily into her own strengths and intellect. She recognized that true power does not come from begging for a seat at a table where you are not respected. It comes from having the courage to build your own table entirely. The most liberating lesson in Lauren's journey was not watching her abusers face federal indictments, public humiliation, or absolute financial ruin. The true victory was the profound realization that she never needed their approval to thrive. By methodically dismantling their lies and walking away, she reclaimed her narrative and built an impenetrable fortress of peace. We must learn to evaluate the people around us based on their genuine integrity, not just their shared DNA. If you have ever had to cut ties to protect your own peace, please share your journey of reclaiming your power in the comments below.